My grandfather had many stories when I was growing up, which is how it's supposed to be. I'd imagine when I'm getting up there, having had kids, my kids having had kids, I'd be doing the same thing, telling them about all the crazy things I'd done or seen in my life. I would probably skip the bad ones and tell them most of the good times I had, the fun, the adventure. Not my grandfather. He told me and my cousins everything. There's one story that stuck with me, like one of those annoying songs that plays over and over inside your head. It's the story about a doctor in Vietnam, back when my grandfather was a POW in the war. He was captured somewhere on the coastline after an ambush left almost everyone in his platoon dead, minus him and a couple others. They took him somewhere in the jungle, caged them, and transported them a few days later deeper into the jungle to some facility. He told me it reminded him of a hospital, but it was far from it. That's where he met the devil, sporting a white coat and horn-rimmed glasses. He spoke choppy English and ended every sentence with a crooked smile. His eyes were void of life. They'd seen things my grandfather wished he'd never seen himself, but the devil doc showed him anyway. My grandfather was separated from his buddies. To this day, he says he never saw them again. If they're alive, he wouldn't know. They could be, but he doesn't think so. Either way, when they pulled them their own separate ways, he'd been strapped to a bed around his head, hands, waist, and legs. As they were rolling him down the hall, he could hear the sound of monkeys hollering, growing in presence by the second. He thought they were going to feed him to them. He'd heard crazy stories and what they did to POWs out there in the jungle. Rumors, tales of terror. If they caught you, they had some really sick ways of taking pleasure in your suffering. But what they had in mind for my grandfather was worse than he could imagine. They entered a room where they put the stretcher on an incline, enough for him to see everything in front of him without having to strain his neck from lifting up his head. It was a room full of chimps. He said the devil doc told him, in about as good of English as a child, that they planned to do something different, something that had never been done before. They planned to transplant the face of one of the chimps onto his own. The procedure shouldn't be too complicated. Only worry would be the body rejecting the donor. Worst case, he'd die from infection. To him, that was the least of his worries. All he could do was squirm and scream, curse and wail. He spat on one of the nurses, though his intention was to spit on the doctor. They stuffed his mouth with rags to shut him up and prevent him from spitting anymore, then rolled him into another room, a room with what he said was an operating table, where he was put to sleep. He said right before he was knocked unconscious, the doctor gave him another one of those crooked smiles. He woke up to the sounds of gunfire, the chimps raving mad, which almost convinced him they'd escaped somehow, the gunshots being the Viet Cong. Only issue was, the men he heard yelling were American. Soon he was loaded onto a helicopter and flown back to a base along the coast of the country. Then later, back to the United States, where he was awarded the Vietnam Service Medal, along with other accolades. He passed away in late April of 2022. He'd gone senile. My father said it was dementia. I had to stop visiting him at the veterans home. All he would do was scream and spit. They'd literally strap him down, which I think only made things worse. For all he knew, he was back in Vietnam. I traveled to Europe in my 30s to meet a doctor out in Turkey who said they would give me cash for one of my kidneys. The United States doesn't allow anyone to make money off their own, so people go to places like this to get what was rightfully theirs. Did you know that one single kidney can be worth almost 100 G's? That's a 1 with 5 zeros. No wonder America doesn't allow it. I'd imagine every man and woman would be lined up down the street, around the corner, and over a bridge to make that kind of cash. The homeless, the addicts, everyone. I found the doctor on the internet, though it was definitely illegal, and I couldn't just flat out tell him what I wanted. I had to wait for my consultation, a brief phone call, some qualifiers or disqualifiers, along with a tidbit of phone tag before I ended up on a flight to Istanbul 3 months later. Fingers crossed the guy was legit and not some lunatic. Touchdown was 3 a.m. on a Thursday. My appointment was set for early that same morning, so sleep would be little. The hotel I slept at was third rate, nothing special. I wasn't there for room service. Turkey's never been in my books for a vacation, believe me. I'd hoped to be on my flight back to the US by Sunday morning. My morning appointment wasn't at some hospital, but at my hotel. A woman sent by the doctor was in my room, where she asked me more questions and took my blood. I didn't know this, but your blood type plays a huge role as to how valuable your organs can be. Type O being the most valuable and highest paid. I was then driven to a shack of an office on the outskirts of the city, where I then met the doctor. He was extremely forward and to the point. Said he did almost 100 operations a year and never had any problems. The operation was quick, and I'd be out of the hospital in a matter of hours. Payment would be in cash as soon as I walk out the door after the procedure, which would be the next day, Saturday. The operation came and went, and as promised, I was paid upon leaving. I was so drugged up that I was guided out the front doors in a wheelchair and chauffeured back to the hotel I was staying at. Borderline incoherent was what I was. As soon as I wheeled to my room, I laid down on the bed and didn't wake up until later that night to a pain in my chest and back. Still coming off the drugs, but not as incoherent as I was when I left from my operation. I was able to get to the bathroom to look in the mirror. I was breathing pretty hard from what I guess was just the meds they had me on. Taking a few good breaths, I looked into the mirror and lifted up my shirt when I saw 2 scars. One of them was the kidney scar running from my midsection to my side. The other was cut from my chest, under my arm, towards my back. I wasn't a doctor or anything, but I was sure that scar had nothing to do with my kidney being removed. But what was I to do? Go to the Turkish police? Say, hey, I just sold my kidney to the black market and I think they stole another organ. There was nothing I could do. I had to ride my flight back home and keep my mouth shut. Hey, at least I was $30K richer. I just have to live with one lung. Ever heard of Matthew Morgan, the guy that was caught operating without a license? He admitted that he'd snuck into over 300 operations, covering 10 major US hospitals, one including Minnesota's Mayo Clinic, during the course of his 25 years in unofficial practice. How didn't he get caught till so late? It's beyond my understanding. Imagine some schmuck off the street who had been to the library and read a few books on medicine and surgery, somehow slipping into your OR and helping out on a liver transplant, all under the radar. The day he was caught, several surgeons walked out of an operation with Matthew when another doctor noticed he was new. Suspicious, he requested his name, and I guess under the pressure and surprise of having been asked, he'd never been asked previously, he didn't give a false name. The doctor checked him against the state of Ohio's Board of Licensed Physicians, where he came up empty, eventually leading to the arrest of Sir Matthew Morgan and 2 years of court battles before he was sentenced to nearly life in prison. You're probably wondering if he was any good. That might explain how he managed to slip under the nose for so long. Why question someone if they're doing a good job? It all comes down to ethics, which modern medicine hasn't got much of these days. From what we know from Matthew himself, he was a major success, though he was hiding something incredibly strange. A warrant had been placed in Matthew's Cincinnati address, off Ingleside by the Ohio River, where bags of blood were refrigerated, all marked with dates and blood types, some as old as a few months. Bottles with what appeared to be blood had also occupied some of the shelves of the fridge, and when tested, they came back so. When asked if he knew about it in questioning at the police station, loaded question, he said yes. But why? We will never know. Speculation, a whole lot of it, filled the media. It got views, of course. The most agreed upon idea of what he was doing with all the blood was drinking it. What else would he have been doing with it? But that doesn't explain why some of the bags found had been dated from months ago. Why hadn't he drunk those? Maybe it was some blood type he didn't like. Maybe he was saving it for something else.